one thing that I've been thinking about is the notion of going too tight or too loose. And it seems to me that it's more that, like, too tight, it's not like you're on one spectrum and you're just too tight or you're too loose. If you're too tight, that means that you're going to be too loose where you should be tighter, and you're too tight where you should be looser. But then it will be the case that, like, if it's too much, there's something that you're not seeing that you should be restraining, and everything else is just kind of secondary to that.
Well, yes. Yeah. What is it then that you wouldn't be seeing? If somebody's restraining too much, what is it that they're overlooking?
Your, I guess, your incessant tendency to keep saying no to things.
Yeah. So you're giving into that. So you should really restrain that. Restrain your giving into that. To that mental pressure. To double down. And say no to more things. Just because it's pressuring you that way. So that's what's being overlooked. As a result of that, one is restraining too much. It's saying no to stuff that has nothing to do with anything unwholesome, really.
Because your criteria, well, it's still going to be just, this doesn't feel nice, so if I try harder, then I'll feel better about myself.
Well, yeah.
For whatever reason.
If I stick to this long enough, this not feeling nice will go away. But it's like, it would go away either way. As in a arisen mental pressure or state, it will go away. So you want to recognize, okay, why it has arisen? Is it because something I've done or something? Like, no, there's just a mental tendency to, okay, the more, if there is like, if I say no to more things, the quicker it will be. Quicker what? What will be quicker? Oh, my running away from suffering will be quicker. So it's like, well, the whole practice is about not being moved by it, not being faster than it, not making it disappear as quickly as possible, which means I want it to go away. The attitude is, I don't want this, I crave against it, let me do these practices, they will remove it for me.
That's another thing that I was thinking about along those lines, is I was always kind of like, console myself with like, oh, well, at least I have, a sense of shame. I'm like always trying to be better and improve, but realizing that's one of the idis, that's one of the like spiritual powers of the noble disciples. Unless you're at that point, you don't have the criteria to distinguish between, well, basically you're going to be feeling guilty about things you shouldn't be, and you're not going to be feeling guilty about things you should. And mistaking that for like actual sense of shame.
Yeah,
I think that can be.
Well, it's that kind of irrational side of the mind that would feel guilty in regard to things you shouldn't feel guilty, and not feel guilty in regard to things you should feel guilty. It's going to come up. That's the kind of the main trait of an untamed mind. And it comes up once you take on the virtue, take on the sense of strength, start dwelling in solitude. So it's unavoidable. It's not like, well, this shouldn't be coming, or I could, if I do something right, this won't be coming up. No, that is the pretty much the main characteristic of an untamed mind. It's this irrational placements of emphasis, wrong emphasis on wrong things. So it takes time to undo that. So that's why it's important how you go about it in that sense. So you have that, say, irrational guilt. You feel guilty on the kind of stuff that's like not really unwholesome, not even your fault in that sense. But that doesn't diminish the fact that the mind is resisting it. And that's the guilt that you feel. It's that blind resistance of an untrained mind. So then what do you do when that happens? What do you do when you're going through those things? Do you double down? Do you tighten the restraint? Increase more? It's like, yeah, but why? I haven't done anything wrong to begin with. Like, I am keeping the virtue. I am restrained. I'm not giving to unwholesome behavior. Yet the mind still acts like this. Why do I need to do anything like out of it? Why do I need to tighten more? And then why? Oh, because I don't want this. I resist this. So it's kind of like, as I said before, you're trying to train a dog that is unruly, and you are angry at that unruliness. You're upset by it. You're frustrated by it. So then it's like, you're not training a dog anymore. You're just trying to get rid of that unruliness. Pretty much by any means necessary. Because that becomes the focus of your bother. So it's like, no, you have to acknowledge that the dog is wild. That the mind is unruly.
And it doesn't to tame.
Well, exactly. That you're supposed to tame it. Not like conquer it in that sense of just force it down until it listens to you, because you won't. And even if you succeed in like pinning it down, well, you can't hold it forever. So when you unpin it, it's going to go back to its wild ways, because it still hasn't really, you haven't been communicating with it. There is no instruction sort of taking place. There is no conveying of the message to that mind. So yeah, sure, sometimes it's like really unruly. You have to just pin it down. Yeah, of course. But I think more often than not, that's not the case. It's more like, it's unruly, you're frustrated, it's unpleasant, you don't want to be facing that unpleasantness of having to experience the unruly mind. So let me do this practice, let me do this reflection, let me double down this way, let me do... all while overlooking the root intention behind all of that you want to do. It's, oh, I really resist this unruliness. I really dislike it. I crave for it to go away. And that's already a wrong message you're conveying to the mind. That's why there is no communication yet, or very little. So when the mind is unruly, you have to recognize it as an unruly mind, like how Satipattanas describe it. So, okay, today dog is very susceptible to my instructions. He listens. I don't even have to tell it twice. Some other day, like I'm a stranger. But either way, if I get frustrated or elated, I will lose the sight of where the communication takes place. So on the days when it doesn't listen, I have to recognize, okay, yes, it would have been great if we continued learning at the same pace like we did last week. But it's not up to me to decide that. So now you have to adapt. You have to pick the signs and features of the mind, not tailor it how you want it so that you can teach it. So you recognize it's unruly, okay, which means it's going to have a very limited amount of messages I can convey, if any. But what do you do when there is an unruly dog that you're trying to train? Well, you stop wasting your time trying to communicate during that period of time because it's not listening, but at the same time you don't let it run wild. You at least contain it and wait for it to calm down without losing sight of it. And when it calms down, then you convey the message. So it's kind of, yes, you're training the animal by training yourself, really, in regard to it. By recognizing, hold on, but I can't be holding this attitude. If I want to train a dog, I have to abandon this. I have to upgrade this. I have to change. I can't. Like, this is the message it's getting. Doesn't matter what I say on top of it. If I'm frustrated, if I'm trying to get rid of it, that is the vibe it's speaking from me. Even if that's not what I really believe I want, that is what I do. And that's what the animal's going to see. So that's why I keep saying to people it's important, because if you assume this external view that saying no to everything is always better, then you're not going to see this whole field of development that's kind of in between. Because every time there is the unruly mind, anytime there is a resistance comes up from your end, you just double down then and say no to more things so that this won't happen. But it's almost like, yeah, it kind of still carries a certain implications, not necessarily of the full-blown Silabhadra Paramasa, but it has certain, like a same principle of that magical kind of, okay, so if I do better in these other ways, this won't come up. Because there is a grain of truth in that. Like, you could review your behavior and see, is the mind unruly because I've been careless? And if the answer is no, or if there's nothing obvious that you know of, then it's probably not. Then it's unruly because it still needs time to learn. But your frustration, you're doubling down, you're trying to really speed it up, well, that's not going to help. That's going to slow it down. Saying, like, your strings were too loose. You tighten them. You start tightening them. You reach the kind of right tune, and then you think, well, tightening brought the right tune. So let me therefore tighten even more. And then you lose the right tune.
Tightening is the thing to do.
Exactly. So if I do tightening, because tightening factually brought the right tune, but only because things were too loose. But now the point comes where tightening takes you away from the tune. So, like, for example, you think like, oh, I have a good sense of shame, or whatever example you want to take, and then you feel bad because you had like a seemingly conceited thought of yourself. Oh, I have such a good sense of shame, a very good samadhi. And then it's like, no, what if I did? And then you start hating yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You start self-loathing it. What happens when you're self-loathing? How does that come to be? What is self-loathing? Can you really loathe yourself?
No.
Yet there is self-loathing. So how come? Who's loathing who?
I was going to say, is it just another form of resisting the mind being untamed? But
you have plenty of resistances, but they don't necessarily mean you're self-loathing. You're not hating yourself. Where does the loathing come from?
Well, the same place that the kind of self-congratulating came from.
Which is?
The mind.
The animal.
Yeah, the animal.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
So, the animal hates you. And when it does, you ask yourself, is it because of something I've done? As in, have I really acted in an intentionally unwholesome way? So when the mind turned against me, he has every right to do so. But then, as I said, if you're established in virtue, sense restraint, not even like perfect, you're going to have your mind loathing you without you having done anything wrong. But that's unpleasant. It's unpleasant to have your own mind basically loathing you. And not seeing that, you're experiencing self-loathing, to put it that way. Yet it's not you who is loathing yourself. It's you who is taking the mind at the face value of loathing you. And that's that deeply ingrained resistance that it's like you can know that you haven't done anything wrong, the mind still feels the same towards you, at least for that period of time, and you still feel valid. Yeah, okay, so I have to change this. You feel validated in those efforts and acceptance of that loathing.
Because if you have like a sense of self-praising or self-congratulation, that's also from the mind.
It's also from the
It
mind.
does the
That you're
same-
jumping
you
on that
jump on the
bandwagon
same
immediately.
thing, and
Yeah.
for the
Yeah.
same reason.
Yeah. Oh wow, I'm so amazing. The thought comes up, prompted by the animal for whatever reason. And it's like, okay. Factually, it might be true there and then. Because of something I've done, or because I've done nothing. The mind just... Either way, it's not up to me to take it at face value and run with it. Through either blindly accepting it or blindly resisting it. So the point is, even if you're doing everything right, in terms of the gradual training, there will be some overlap that you would have to grind through, in a sense of overlap that you're doing everything right, yet the mind is still loathing you for whatever reason, whatever day, for however long. And it's instead of, oh, but let me change my behavior, let me improve it, let me this. If you already know that it's nothing, it's not because of anything obvious that you've done, then it's like, no, it's just the mind needs to get the message that I'm not following along with this anymore. Without trying to kill it, beat it, strangle it. Because obviously that's giving it too much of a message. Because yeah, the dog might just hate you on some days. And it's like, oh, I haven't done anything. Even accidentally, let alone intentionally. So okay, you just have to live through that and calm down the animal and then continue. But obviously, people not seeing the signs of their own mind, not seeing their own mind, whatever happens in their mind, it's theirs. It's they're doing it. Although, see, nobody wants to load themselves. Nobody can load themselves in that sense. Yet they are. Because the mind is, and they're fully identified with it because they don't see anything in between. So then whichever kind of whimsical direction that animal takes,
That's yours.
it's you doing it. I don't even know. I don't want it, yet I'm doing it and I can't stop it. And that's pretty much why meditation is what it is today, contemporarily speaking, because, you know, as I said, there is no development whatsoever to begin with, and then all people are left with is just, okay, I can't cope with this anymore, so let me just find ways of dumbing it all down, completely sort of being half asleep, stop thinking, stop everything, just to experience some form of artificial peace, where I become unaware of the animal that hates me, that I'm identified with. Or you could reason and go through the motions of psychologizations and just repeated steps, why and no, and why it is, why it isn't, why it shouldn't be, why it all rooted in, yeah, but see, hold on, why do I need to do anything on account of this animal being an idiot? It's like I don't. So I have to draw a line for myself to stop kind of giving into that, okay, yeah, let me deal with this. And if it loads you, fine. It's not fine if it loads you because you did something stupid. But then you'll know that very clearly. That's, again, that sense of shame will be very, very obvious if it was broken. But yeah, if you take the mind at face value, it will present you with completely faultless, blameless scenarios and blame you for it. And you'll feel the guilt. Irrational guilt. You'll feel it. And if you think, okay, so every guilt must be dealt with, you're falling for its trap.
So the more familiar you are with the mind doing that,
yeah, the better. But the familiarity of the mind doing that is not on the level of theory and reasoning. I mean, yes, you need to learn about it, but really familiarity is through not acting out of no matter what the mind pressures you with.
Mm.
Yeah.
You're becoming more and more accustomed to, more and more familiar, more and more like wise in that sense. Because the suttas, I think it's the Agama, they said wisdom is the absence of dispassion, basically.
The absence of passion.
Oh, sorry, the absence of passion, yeah. So the disappearance of passion equals wisdom, not having it all fit in your little mind, like, you know, all the theories and stuff, it's all nice and connected. It matches every sutta. It's like, no. And you realize you could be telling yourself all the right answers, and they will not bring dispassion. If, however, you don't bother with any answering, for whatever reason, but you do not give in to an unruly animal, doesn't matter what it pressures you, doesn't matter how personal it tries to get, you are developing dispassion. Because that's the essence of dispassion, is not acting out of the passionate mind.
And developing wisdom at the same time.
Well,
You
that's
have
what
to be-
wisdom is, yeah. So yeah, by all means, become familiar with it. Through not acting out and through recognizing the peripheral mental states, the moods that animal is in, the pressure that it exerts on you, sometimes subtle, sometimes coarse. Either way you see it, it's like, okay, losing sight of this, in other words, like forgetting about it, is how I make the mistake of sort of going along with it. But if I don't lose the sight of it, whatever it's revolving around, it's still not a problem. It still hasn't taken the center stage, as we spoke before.
It reminds me of like that, taking that movement of the mind for granted as your point of view, because that has enormous consequences over. I mean, that's basically a samsara, really. But But like an example, I was thinking about recently. It reminded me, a long time ago, somebody I was speaking to with. This was in the place where I was before. We were having a conversation, and she said, you know, like I think I really started thinking about what it would be like to experience non-self and to experience complete dispassion, and I realized I'm terrified of it. I don't want it.
Yeah, she got the right idea.
Yes, and that was the point, and she felt fear.
Yeah.
But then she said, so I don't want it. I don't know what to do. I think and then she said, and she literally like blocked. That was okay. So I have to try and make myself want it in order to then practice for it. And I was thinking, like, and I remember thinking at the time, that's very interesting, because I had recognized, I had loads of times like thinking about it and feeling fear, like I'm terrified of becoming an arahant. I don't want to. But then I would think, well, why should I take that
at face value?
Why should I take that as the measure, as the reference point for what is good?
Yeah.
When has what I want, doing what I want to do, brought happiness and lasting peace? It hasn't. So you end up realizing, well, actually, this is the only way. I have to do it, in spite of at the same time recognizing, I don't want to.
Yeah.
The mind doesn't want to.
Yeah.
But and even like just basic sense of shame as kind of can kind of help with that in a way, as because you know just that would kind of put a block. Like I think about, you know, I don't want to, so maybe I'll just like abandon it, and you feel a sense of shame. No, like
no, it's not a right thing to.
It's not a right thing to do.
I don't want to quit.
Like I can't let myself just quit. Like, you know, or like. You know, other people, in the Buddha's time, all these people, you see, they were struggling and so on. If they could do it, I must be able to do too. There's just these basic...
That's the difference between sort of doing it already for the more transparent, authentic reasons, as opposed to doing it just because you were inspired on a kind of wrong idea. Yeah, I think I was saying before, like, even when I wanted to become a monk, and I was already prepared writing to monasteries and stuff, and then I had that interview for the UK visa, pretty much the only place they replied to me, and they denied me.
Okay.
I went there and I went for it, and he said, sorry, like, you know, if you were already a monk or something, I could let you in because that's the category. But a non-member of religious order to go in to become a member of a religious order, I can't give you the member of religious order visa because it's simply not true. And I remember I was relieved.
Yeah.
I was going home feeling like, oh, weight's off me now because I genuinely tried. And then I remember I was scared after that thought because I thought, oh, so then like shit, if I'm relieved, means I have to like fight now twice as hard to not slide back. Because before at least I had something that was sort of heading towards. And then like 3 or 4 days, and he called me, said, come on, I found the category I can slot you in. And then he was like back on that okay, we're doing this. But yeah, if I were to just let my mind decide,
Exactly.
I would not have done it. I had no reason to do it. Like there was nothing that I was running away from or bothering, quite the opposite. But deep down you realize, yeah, but how long will these things last? How long will be before it changes the way I don't want it to change? And it's like an obvious truth that's right there. It's like, oh yeah, like, I mean, nothing else is really worth. But if your practice is just rooted in that inspiration, which it might be fine in the beginning, like that's the only way you know, but you will come to the point where exactly you realize the mind doesn't want it. And if you still use your inspiration as a criteria for making a judgment of right and wrong, you're done.
Yeah.
Then you'll be hopping from one practice to another, one place to another, this, that, and then whatever takes your fancy, which usually is going to be non-practice, non-virtue, and sensuality, and so on. So it's like, that's why like you really, like through correct recollection, reflection, and drilling in these contexts, you are clarifying stuff. So even when the mind doesn't want to do it, the broader picture still kind of does not sort of sway because of it. It's like, yeah, it doesn't want to do it, but what else is there to do other than tame your mind rightly? Because whatever I would let my mind decide to do, it's because it wants the peace, it wants the happiness. It just obviously doesn't know how to get it in that wise way. It would go ignorantly about it. So if I allow it to go in ignorant ways about those seeking those things, like I'm the one who's going to suffer and the mind will suffer. So, but that perspective, like, yes, it makes sense. You can read it, you can hear it, you can understand it, you can even believe in it, but you need to be, maintaining that to really sink in. So then when the mind does become unruly, becomes like this, becomes like that, this practice has weight. The perspective, has weight, has value. Because otherwise, yeah, it's just hollow words, really. Empty ideas.
I've thought of like the virtue of like the right kind of stubbornness, almost.
Sure.
Like,
if it's applied rightly, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just like stubbornness in the against your own mind's tides.
But it is that movement of the mind, movement of the animal. When it sort of twitches, calls away, it's like you can't help but overlook it. Even if you see it, you can't help but overlook it. And by that I mean you can't help but be identified with it first, take it for granted. And then, okay, this is the animal. Once you already, it's like, oh, hold on. Doesn't matter the movement. It belongs to the animal. So it's maintaining that perspective, not acting out, and becoming more and more familiar with these movements of the animal. And then one day you just realize, oh, it moved and I haven't identified myself with it. It's not like something you can pre-decide when you're not gonna be identified. But if you keep recognizing that, yes, the sole reason I am feeling the pressure of the animal, although I'm not making it worse or aggravating it through acting out, the fact that I am being pressured to act out means it's somewhere underneath that, to put it that way, I have taken it up. I am identified with it. But it's not something you can just travel back, undo that part, and then everything else falls in place. You can only do it in reverse, so to speak. So you're doing it more accurately, not by trying not to take up the movement through reasoning. No, you're doing it more accurately through not giving into the pressure and conveying that message to the mind. So then the more it moves in the face of that clear message, the clearer the movement becomes, as if something that it's not you're doing. Doesn't matter which way it goes. And that it cannot touch you. That's the point. Basically, you flinch. The animal does that to your face and you flinch. And you just can't, it's like a reflex. But you realize the only reason you still have that reflex is because you still are not 100% clear that it cannot touch you, doesn't matter how forcefully it comes at you. But the clearer that becomes, the less of a flinch you're going to have. So the mind moves quickly. It makes no difference to you because it moves elsewhere. Yeah. It is elsewhere before it moved, and its movement remains elsewhere, not where it can harm you.
Exactly. It's like by not flinching, you have your eyes wide open, you can see the whole thing clearly, and you recognize, oh, actually it cannot touch. But it's like...
Well, the recognition of you cannot be touched starts way before you're able to not flinch. You'll be flinching. But through not acting out, through recognizing that pressure, although you flinched, you recognize, but hold on, it still cannot do anything unless I act out of it. That's how it starts to sink in and comes to the point of where even the split second animal twitch does not make you flinch. Cannot make you flinch. Not because you're so focused on it to not flinch and prop your eyes open or something. It's not rooted in like determination. It's rooted in just understanding, sinking deep enough, whereby it doesn't matter how quick, how sudden, how spontaneous, how unexpected the movement of the animal is, there is absolutely no wavering in the understanding that you're untouchable by that movement. And everything else is second to it. Because that's the sole reason you wouldn't be flinching. The understanding that it cannot touch you is deep enough. It has settled in far enough. And that's the sole reason you would be flinching. Is if you still, at some point, at some corner of your mind, are unsure whether it's going to touch you or not, whether it's going to hurt you or not. And then you flinch.
And getting to that point is just, like
what
you said, you can't start down the road. Like, and
I'm saying like what you should be aiming for, but don't fall into view now. Okay, so let me learn how not to flinch, while I still act and give in to the pressure of that's already the result of the flinch. So it's like you'll come to that point if you would have been taming the mind rightly. It's just, as I said, you're training yourself as well in recognizing how far the animal can go. And goes the same way when the mind twitches and jumps and moves towards pleasure. You flinch. It's not only when it turns against you. Sensuality is a flinch already. You're affected by it because you flinched. You were like, oh, it moved. The animal kicked and I flinched. And now I'm running with it. So I gotta stop running. Now I have to endure the kicking in my face, put up with flinching until I really understand that it cannot harm me. Then the animal will start to understand and give up trying to kick me, because it works. It doesn't need to hit you. It just needs you to move. So by kind of twitching towards you, you flinch and you moved. It doesn't need to make a contact. But once you stop moving, because you fully understood that the mind cannot touch you, well, then the mind will eventually give up trying to touch you, because it also understood that the threat of touching you doesn't work anymore, because you are not flinching. And that's why it needs to be done in reverse, because there's a lot riding on top of that flinch. Layers upon layers upon layers of you just proliferating and building up perceptions to the point of, say, mind gets a sudden desire. You flinch, like momentarily you blink, let's say that way. You open your eyes next second, and the next thing you see, it's you're full on riding towards it. There's nothing else in between, basically. That's your like general untrained mind. Like sensuality comes to your face, boo. You flinch. As I said, eyes are closed for a millisecond. When you open them, you are already 80% down the rabbit hole of sensuality. Because yeah, there's a lot packed in that split second. That's the whole undoing on the level of the middle way, the gradual training. So first and foremost, you simply stop acting out. That's still, now you have to bear the whole weight of the threatening animal trying to move you, desire, hindrances, you flinching, i.e. you being affected by it, but not making it worse. Through not making it worse, your perspective broadens. You do, okay, yes, it still touches me. I would really like to not be even touched, because that would be even more peaceful. But it's nowhere near me just running down in full-on panic mode or sensual mode or anger mode and acting out like a maniac, which then makes the animal even more powerful. And as you keep, as I said, progressing in the reverse of the direction of your proliferation, the point comes when even if the animal flinches because it's kind of in face of death and its last breath, they're being killed, you won't be moved by, you won't flinch on account of that. Even if the animal twitches and fights for its life, you won't be moved by that. That's why Arahant cannot be touched by death either. He's free from it. Doesn't matter what animal does, how close it feels, you know it's always going to stop in front of your feet. Cannot possibly come closer. Impossible, because again, you haven't reasoned it or just believe in it. You've been doing it and it's been confirmed over and over and over and over and over again. Even the dumbest of the mind will understand it. It will have to sink in. And that's the differences in the suttas. Yes, somebody needs to do this for a fortnight and he's an arahant. Somebody needs to do it for 7 years. But either way, even the dumbest of the minds will have to get the message if you stick to that right level.